My name is Bethany Pierce, and I'm here to tell you about my new novel, Feeling for Bones. I began the book when I was in high school. I was 16, and I had always loved to write. I started actually at a very young age. Like the character in the book, I had a mother who didn't believe in television, so I was left to my own devices. I was on my bike saving the universe, pretending it was a intergalactic, shuttle in space, or I was singing into a turkey baster as a microphone. And in the 6th grade, I wrote my first novel entitled Lost in Space, and was devastated to open TV Guide and see that someone had stolen my title. So I was always writing, and when I was 16, I began in earnest and wanted to write a book, but didn't know what to write about. And I took to heart the adage, write what you know. And one day, sitting in my attic bedroom, I wrote in my journal a description, a fictional description of a character visiting a doctor, very much like the visit to the doctor I'd had that year. And I had learned I had anorexia and was trying to process that information. So I created this character, Olivia, who was also 16 and fighting the same battle, and began the novel in an omniscient point of view, so I could look down on Olivia and see her problems, not as mine, but as someone else's, and was able then to process them and think objectively about why I had this issue and why I had this obsession. And I wrote every summer in notebooks. School always got in the way. I would go to school and I would write during study hall, but mostly wrote in the summers, and wrote all the way up through college, and my sophomore year of college completed the last revision of the novel. And over the years, sent it to publishers and editors, and didn't have any luck until I was actually in graduate school working on a creative writing degree, and at that point was working on a new novel and had moved on. And oddly enough, that was when the book really began to take shape. An editor saw it and really saw promise and asked me to rework it again. And for the first time, I tried writing Olivia's story from the first-person point of view. And instead of Olivia thought this or Olivia thought that, I was able to say I thought this and I thought that, and to own those thoughts because I had so much distance on them, and I could look back on that time in my life as a separate time and was able to kind of take possession of that time of my life and not be ashamed of it anymore and understand it better. And it was an intimate moment with this character who was no longer me. She had suddenly become someone else, a friend, that I could write about in a very intimate way. So it took me total, from first notebook to holding the book in my hand, nearly 8 years to write this book. And I think that reveals something about anorexia, that it takes a very, very long time to recover. And most women I know who struggle with it, like myself, want it to change overnight and go to bed every night promising themselves tomorrow's going to be different and I'm not going to do these things tomorrow. But tomorrow is too soon, and you need to give it days and sometimes weeks and sometimes months and years. That you might have, like Olivia in the book, you might have a week of 7 days in which at first 2 are good and you're not under the weight of this depression and this fear, and the other 5 are bad. And eventually those good days compete with the bad, and then eventually the good outweigh the bad, and that was my experience. And I believe that God has the power to touch us and to overnight give us healing, but there's something about that process of learning to rethink and rethink your view of the world and of yourself. And that's what I learned, was that anorexia is about perception. And the thing that makes this book different than many memoirs or diaries about anorexia is that this character is also an artist, and part of her journey is not just recovering from anorexia, but developing and budding as an artist and as a painter. And the first step for a lot of painters in becoming an artist is learning to imitate nature, learning to look at the world and depict it on a page, to draw a boot so it looks like a boot, or to draw an apple so it looks like an apple. But apples are not apples like we think of them. They're not these cartoon balls of red. They're this compilation of curves and lines. They're deep maroons and streaks of green and a pale blue shine. And Olivia has to learn to see all of these varieties of color and line in her world. And as she does that, she turns that new gaze on her own body. and sees her body not as an object that needs to meet a certain standard of beauty or a canon of proportions, but as a series of curves and lines and colors that are beautiful in their own right. And perception is not only about seeing things, seeing objects differently, it's also a matter of understanding the invisible. And art is not just an imitation of nature, it's a search for truth. As Olivia is learning to see the world and draw it and paint it, she is also learning to question her perceptions of things that are invisible. And that becomes her spiritual journey. So her spiritual journey and search and her development as an artist are parallel journeys that conflate in the end, and they come together. And she begins to question the nature of God and of the church and of Christ. She's grown up in the church all her life. And as she begins to interrogate the world around her, she begins to put Christ in the center and question who he is and what he means to her, and if he means anything in this search for healing. And that is quite different from my own experience. I was a Christian before I had anorexia, but I did learn through the process that God was a counselor and a healer, that he was there to give me a new understanding and a new perception, and I attribute every epiphany I had to his grace. So that is my story, and I hope you enjoy it. I have several characters I'm in love with. You'll meet Olivia and her little sister, Califer, who's a little blonde, very hyperactive child who wears her underwear backwards, and you meet her great Aunt Margaret, who's a bit of a busybody, and her best friend, Molly. And all these characters play a part in Olivia's search. So I hope you maybe check it out and check out my blog and send me an email. I'd love to hear from anyone that's interested. So thank you for listening.